Good morning. Good morning, everybody. I'm Jeffrey Sachs, and I'm delighted to be with you. We're going to have a number of Google Hangouts throughout the semester for the age of sustainable development, and I really want to use these occasions to meet, to chat, to answer questions, to hear comments, and so I'm most grateful for your participation and for the chance to be together. Let me start by just emphasizing what an important and interesting time we live in for the challenge of sustainable development. Not only is the challenge of combining economic development, social inclusion, and environmental sustainability tough and big and a growing challenge, but we're also in the lead up to a year of remarkable diplomatic opportunity. 2015, as I emphasize in the course, and I want to reiterate now, is the time when the UN member states, the 193 governments of the world, have agreed to face the challenge of sustainable development. They have agreed to do it in three ways. Of course, success remains to be seen, but they have committed to three big steps in 2015. The first is in September 2015 to adopting Sustainable Development Goals, or SDGs. These SDGs, I think, will be the organizing principle for the world's fight for sustainable development over the coming generation. The likelihood is that SDGs will be adopted in 2015 to have effect until the year 2030. They will be following the Millennium Development Goals. The second big commitment is to reform the international financial system in order to promote sustainable development. That's a huge agenda. It means first reforming how official money, such as development assistance or loans for infrastructure or public financing for global public goods like technology development, should proceed. It also means changing the way that private capital moves globally so that it is not directed towards socially destructive activities like more development of fossil fuels that can't safely be used, or major pollution or deforestation, and also to stop the abuses of secrecy and tax havens, the hot capital that leaves so many poor countries, and the financial instability that has overturned large parts of the world economy repeatedly in the last 20 years. For example, the 1997 Asian financial crisis and the 2008 Wall Street financial crisis, which both turned out to be global scale events. So that Finance for Sustainable Development effort will be at a summit in Addis Ababa in July 2015. And then the third component of this big agenda for 2015 is what's called COP21, the Conference of the Parties, in its 21st meeting, COP21, of the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, the UNFCCC. That will take place in Paris in 2015. And in Paris, the governments have said in advance, we will agree on a new framework for facing human-induced climate change. So that's why I'm excited for us to be together now and throughout this semester in the age of sustainable development, and in other online courses that will be coming during the year. We'll have a course on climate change and climate change negotiation beginning in October at sdsn.edu. I'll be tweeting that out for everybody. And remember, hashtag SUSDEV is our hashtag for the age of sustainable development. And then we'll have an online global climate negotiation starting in the beginning of 2015, and that will be an opportunity for us online together to create and adopt a climate agreement in advance of what the heads of state have promised to do. My feeling is let's show them what really can be accomplished with good thinking and global participation, and this can help be a template for the agreement in December in 2015. And all of this means that we have a very exciting agenda. Now, there's a lot to talk about in the substance of economic development, social inclusion, environmental sustainability, climate change, biodiversity, health, education, and all of the other subjects. And the news every day, every week brings us more evidence of the intense relevance of these issues. A couple of days ago, the World Meteorological Organization, WMO, issued a report saying that the growth of greenhouse gases was extraordinarily high in the past year, much higher than had been anticipated. We're on a trajectory of global warming much faster than is safe and faster than is even previously contemplated. When we watch the horrendous Ebola epidemic that is spreading in West Africa right now, we're reminded about basic issues, of course, of public health and the inadequacy of the health systems that threaten the lives of so many hundreds of millions of people around the world. And Ebola is a terrible emerging infectious disease, but it spreads so rapidly and with such devastating costs because the health systems in the West African impoverished countries, Guinea, Sierra Leone, and Liberia, are just not able to keep up with this epidemic. So these are the kinds of challenges, and we have to keep track and watch the news each day. And I'm going to now turn to the kinds of questions that people are asking, and let's have a good discussion. Actually, I'm going to start with this one. The question is from Swati Koshal. What role is the instability in the Islamic world going to have on sustainable development? What implications will reduced dependence on oil have on these states? We have a situation of quite extensive war and conflict now that spreads from the Sahel in West Africa, the semi-desert region just south of the Sahara, in countries like Mali, Niger, Chad, through to the Horn of Africa, in South Sudan, in Somalia, across the Red Sea into Yemen, and then up into the Eastern Mediterranean in Syria, and across West Asia in Iraq, and then into Central Asia in Pakistan and Afghanistan. It is a large swath of thousands and thousands of kilometers of violence, and there are definitely, in part, networks of violence that are part of this. I believe that one of the reasons for so much of this violence is the impoverishment in these regions, is the economic failure, the drought, the hunger, the lack of jobs that plague so many of these countries. And I believe that unless we look at the fundamental sources of instability, the bad governance, the poverty, the hunger, the climate change, and address those fundamental factors, all of the military approaches that were engaged in, including the announcements by the U.S. government of more bombing that President Obama made yesterday. I don't believe that these can resolve the situation at all. So my feeling is that the lack of sustainable development is both a cause of violence, and of course violence is one of the most powerful barriers to sustainable development. The rate at which we're destroying rather than building is shocking. The disarray in Syria, the fact that nearly 200,000 people have died since mid-2011, the fact that this civil war builds nothing and accomplishes nothing actually is very sad, and it is this vicious circle of violence leading to economic catastrophe leading to more violence. To break out of the vicious circle, one needs a better vision and a better strategy than is on the table right now. That strategy, in my view, should be to help the region that is in conflict find a path to economic prosperity so that people have other things to do with their lives and ways to overcome the growing environmental crisis in most of this region. But we're very far from that. We're stuck in cycles of violence, I'm afraid, rather than finding the sustainable development path. Perhaps our discussions will help find a better way. Let me take a question from let's see. I hit a different button, but I'll take that question from Manu Prakash. Dr. Sachs, how can developing countries like India balance biodiversity conservation and achievement of hefty economic growth targets at the same time? First, environmental sustainability isn't really a trade-off with economic growth. When the environment is badly managed, and this is happening in a lot of northern India right now, where the water table has declined so much because of the overuse of groundwater, you end up with not only no economic growth, but economic decline because agricultural productivity goes into reverse. So sustainable agriculture, for example, that doesn't tear down the remaining forests and that doesn't deplete the groundwater is vital. This has to be based on strategies of technologies that are resource saving combined with policies to promote those technologies. In India, just to continue the example, it's traditionally been the case that electricity and water for poor farmers has been, or for farmers I should say, has been completely free. It's actually the case that the large farmers claim the lion's share of those subsidies and end up overexploiting the natural resources. One example of a smarter policy would be to target the subsidies more towards the smallholder poor farmers and limit their scale so that richer farmers and the higher income part of the population doesn't grab the lion's share of the subsidy, and so that everybody is using resources far more efficiently. That's called a lifeline tariff strategy. We'll be talking about some of those choices in the semester. Let me take this question from Chris Keeper. Have you seen faith communities involved in sustainability impacts, positive or negative? What do you think their role can be in helping attain the SDGs? I was just in a wonderful meeting, actually, the past couple of days in Antwerp, Belgium, of what's known as the Community San Egidio. Community San Egidio is a major NGO based in Rome, closely linked with the Vatican, that brings together religious leaders from across the world's religions, from Roman Catholic faith to many Protestant denominations, to many Orthodox Christian denominations to Hindu, Muslim, Jewish, Tao, Buddhist, and many other religions. It's very exciting because here are leaders from around the world. They represent highly diverse communities, and they come together to try to find ways that interdenominationally they can work on what's really important for the people that they represent. And sustainable development is very high on the agenda. There was a tremendous discussion that I was happy to be involved in looking at how religious leaders who help to keep our moral vision of the creation and the importance of protecting the earth, how that voice can resonate with politicians who sometimes are not paying attention, and with explaining issues to parishioners and congregations, for example. There is a huge challenge of getting the facts, the science, the information to religious leaders who work with and speak with local communities. And I think this has to be part of our goal. I'm also extremely pleased, grateful that Pope Francis, for example, has spoken out very, very vigorously on the need to protect the planet, on the dangers of climate change. And I believe the Vatican is going to be playing a leading role in the coming year in helping the whole world to understand that sustainable development is a moral imperative. If we have an economic system that's running completely without the constraints of ethics or protection of the environment or thinking about the next generation, we're ruined. And I think the Vatican is going to explain that very clearly and help the help the world to recognize the urgency of this challenge. Here is a very good question from Daniel Suarez. I'm concerned about my country, Venezuela. As a main exporter of commodities, our economy depends on the trade of oil. How can we make that change in order to embrace sustainable development? Excellent question, both because oil has to fall in global use significantly in the coming decades for global sustainability, and also because we see in Venezuela that a country that has an overdependence on one commodity, and in Venezuela's case it's petroleum, is subject to big swings up and down depending on changes of world prices, world demand, and Venezuela's had a lot of instability over the years. This is in part a major political choice. I met with the late President Hugo Chavez soon after he came into office, and I tried to encourage him to adopt policies that would promote a diversified Venezuelan economy. But his administration was not interested in that. It was interested mainly in promoting oil and then using the oil for various public policies, but not in thinking about the long-term diversified future of the Venezuelan economy. I think now Venezuela is in a lot more economic trouble, unfortunately, but part of it is simply not thinking ahead. When it comes to natural resource development, countries need long-term strategies to maintain diversification, to spread risk, so they're not completely dependent on the risks of one or two commodities, to invest the proceeds of the natural resources well, especially in human capital, in education and in health, and to work on diversifying the economy, for example, by promoting an exchange rate system that keeps other export goods competitive. Unfortunately, Venezuela allowed its exchange rate to become hugely overvalued, making it unprofitable for any non-oil export sector to develop. And that is one of the roots of the lack of diversification of the Venezuelan economy. So Rebecca Wren asks, what role can education for sustainable development play in younger years? even in preschool. Well, let me say that I believe that education is vital, not only education for understanding sustainable development, what we're engaged in, but education, of course, to empower individuals to be productive and to be good citizens. And these sustainable development goals will surely promote universal education of quality from primary preschool education, I should say, early childhood development, at least through a secondary education and acquisition of vocational skills or higher education. So the SDGs will give a very big focus to education in the period 2015 to 2030. Part of the goal of having sustainable development goals per se, part of the reason for having them is the education about sustainable development. So I hope that many courses around the world from primary school upward will take the sustainable development goals as they're adopted next year and build a school curriculum around it. And one could see that from the earliest years in primary school, children could learn about nature and about how we have to take care of nature, and then in secondary school about the basic science of climate change and biodiversity, and in university level, of course, the interactions of the economy, of social diversity, and the environment. So the subject of SDGs really can be taught at all levels. And I do look forward to the day when a sixth grader in Accra or in New York City or in Sao Paulo or in Ho Chi Minh City or in any other part of the world writes an essay at age 10 or age 12 what the Sustainable Development Goals mean for me and mean for my country. That will be a very good educational process. And I think many of you in your communities or in your work ahead will be able to help disseminate the ideas of sustainable development, and yes, help to build them into a curriculum that can help children from the earliest ages know the reality. Let me take a question from Musamali. Dr. Sachs, what is your take on green growth, green economy, and what specific ways can be understood to be synonymous with sustainable development? There's a general proposition which we know, and that is that today's low-income countries are seeking to improve living standards, to continue to have economic growth, and to narrow the income gaps with the high-income world. And success in that is absolutely part of sustainable development. But if what happens is that all countries, rich and poor, continue to use the same kind of resources that we're using right now, and simply have an expansion of the economic output. In other words, if we simply have more of the same kind of economy that the world economy represents today, more oil, more gas, more coal, more land use, more water use, simply multiplying the resource use as today's poor economies expand, we're going to have a collision with the functioning of ecosystems, with climate change, with the loss of biodiversity, with rising ocean levels, with the acidification of the oceans, with many environmental catastrophes. That means that the basic idea of green growth is to combine economic growth with lower rather than higher primary resource use, more crops per drop of water, more energy per molecule of carbon dioxide released into the atmosphere, more food produced per hectare of farmland, In other words, raising the productivity of primary resource use. This is both an imperative for success in sustainable development and a major technological challenge. How could you get more crops per drop? How can we have more energy with less carbon emissions? And it's also a great policy challenge, because if you can identify technically how these things can be done, for example, going from open field irrigation to drip irrigation, which saves water and allows more crop per drop, or going from coal-fired power plants to solar power plants, thereby having the same electricity perhaps, but with lower carbon dioxide emissions. Then comes a policy question. What kind of incentives should be put in place to make that transition effective and with the lowest cost and the highest benefit? That essentially is what green growth is about. A term that's also used is decoupling growth from primary resource use. Can this be done? The answer at a technical level would seem to be yes. There are technologies that allow for the same goods and services that we're producing now to be produced with a lower demand on primary commodities like land, water, or greenhouse gas emissions. The question is, how effective are those technologies? How fast can they be introduced? What incremental costs would they imply? Would going from coal to solar power harm economic development, for example? How could a poor farmer adopt expensive drip irrigation? These are very practical questions of economics and public policy. They're central to our focus in this course on the age of sustainable development. To give you a snapshot answer, green growth is necessary. It is technically feasible. It requires a long-term technology roadmap to identify what kinds of policies can get us to where we need to go. And it requires a deep policy analysis, how to shape market forces and government investment, for example, and regulations to make the transition. I won't say more about this topic now. It's all through the course in the weeks ahead. Excuse me. Let me take a sip of coffee. Susan Deshane asks, how can we help politicians to look beyond short-term goals which promote their re-election towards long-term sustainability? This is a really basic question. How do we make political institutions and the incentives faced by the political leaders compatible with the long-term needs of sustainable development? One part of that answer is public awareness, public demands on our politicians. One way to move towards that is through global shared objectives like sustainable development goals. I'm hoping and counting on the fact that when the world adopts SDGs in September 2015, that this will be an important signal to the whole world. Such goals are important, and hold your politicians who signed on to these goals accountable to them. So one of the whole purposes of having goals like sustainable development goals is indeed to move the politicians towards longer term thinking. Another aspect of this, related but not the same, is to agree on treaties, to bind governments in the world to treaty obligations. Treaties don't work 100%, but they also don't have zero effect. They are partially effective instruments. They have slowed down, for example, but not stopped nuclear proliferation. They have helped to achieve goals in health and in some kinds of environmental protection, for example, fighting against ozone depletion. So another part of getting the politicians to do the right thing is for governments to bind themselves through international treaties that country A will do the right thing, in part knowing that country B is also going to be doing the same, so that there's sharing. And probably in our world today, the two most important countries, A and B, for this sharing are the United States and China, the two biggest economies in the world. They need to agree, for example, in next year's climate negotiation on a basic strategy that will give hope to dozens and dozens of other countries to get onto the same structure. And third is reforming our political institutions internally so that they take a longer term perspective. I'll just give one example of that. California put on its books by law the goal of deep decarbonization of California's energy system by the year 2050. And California's created a lot of state-level institutions, scientific, technological, and public investment, to achieve that deep decarbonization. So the politicians become a part of the process of achieving these goals by building long-term institutions to keep the focus on those goals. Let me take a question from Mr. Johnny Vega. Mr. Sachs, which country or city do you think has or is closest to have a sustainable development model? And what were the main factors that made it possible? This is indeed one of my favorite questions, because different countries have different strategies. Cities are actors in their own right, and we can see, therefore, big differences across cities. I would add subnational states as well as nation states. And we can learn from each other by looking comparatively in the way that Johnny Vega is asking. As I mentioned, in the United States, for example, California is in the lead in the United States in creating a technological, infrastructure, institutional, and political path to deep decarbonization. Bravo. All the rest of us have to learn in the United States from what California is successfully implementing. In Germany, in Europe, Germany is undertaking the so-called Energiewende, or energy transition, from fossil fuels and nuclear power to renewables. It's not a simple transition, but more and more of Germany's electricity is now produced by wind and solar power. There's a lot of work to do to make this successful. For example, there's a lot of wind power in northern Germany, but no transmission lines to carry it to southern Germany, and some of the states in between say, no thank you, we don't want those long distance direct current high voltage lines. So even within a country, getting coordination is often very, very difficult. If I look at which countries are furthest ahead in the whole sustainable development agenda, meaning the integration of economic, social, and environmental objectives, and look around the world, I would make two statements. First, probably Northern Europe, Germany, Denmark, Netherlands, Norway, Sweden, Finland, are closest in the world to having that kind of balanced approach that aims for economic growth, but also a strong commitment to social inclusion and low income inequality, combined with environmental sensibility. And the success there, I think, is inspiring and notable. That philosophy in that region is sometimes called social democracy. It's sometimes called social market economy. That's the term that has been used in Germany for many decades. And I think it's a very admirable philosophy that's close to the concept of sustainable development. It's also true, however, that because every country is part of an unsustainable world, even countries that individually are trying to do the right thing are suffering from massive climate change or ocean acidification or other global scale ills that hit the individual countries. This is just to emphasize that no country can say we go it alone, because if one country does what needs to be done but the rest do not, even that good behavior, the one that's following the path of sustainable development, is going to be extremely hard hit by an unsustainable world. Let me look at some of the other questions we have. Here's a very big question coming up from Greg Bell. Do you think that capitalism in its present form is a large part of the problem? Of course, capitalism is a big word and a loaded word, and it means very different things to very different people, and also to in different places. I would say, for example, that the social democracy that I was just describing in Norway or Sweden is capitalism, but it is capitalism with a major role of the state in promoting equality and environmental sustainability. The United States is also capitalist, but much more oriented towards business and much less interested in its policy design and in Washington politics to questions of equality and environmental sustainability. So there are many, many kinds of capitalism in the world. I think this is one of the most important points to understand. Some emphasize sustainable development, others basically ignore it. And these are political battles also within countries. Some political parties are more focused on inclusive and sustainable growth. Others say, we don't care, we just want business, we just want money, we just want profits. Of course, I'm not very sympathetic to that view, but that political battle rages within countries. I would put the issue something like this. Capitalism as a broad economic system of market orientation, profit-making companies, and the corporate business form as important, and capital raised in private capital markets with private ownership, has been key to economic development for the past 200 years. Capitalism has been a major spur to economic growth and investment. Even Karl Marx, who was, of course, the fiercest critic of capitalism, recognized that capitalism gave tremendous dynamism to technology and to the spread of technology. But I would say that capitalism does not accomplish by itself three things. One is ending extreme poverty, because many people in a capitalist system end up falling into collapse. They are trapped in poverty and they don't get out of poverty. Second, capitalism does not by itself promote social inclusion, because capitalism can lead to huge inequalities of income and wealth within societies. And third, capitalism by itself does not protect the natural environment, especially since many of the things that need protection, for example, the atmosphere from greenhouse gases or the oceans from acidification, don't have a price in the market economy unless governments decide to put on a carbon tax or otherwise regulate the market economy. So capitalism by itself can be a part of the engine of economic growth, but it will not accomplish three big things that sustainable development aims for. And those are ending poverty, social inclusion, and environmental sustainability. That's why we need a mixed economic system that has market forces and private investment combined with regulation, public investment, and a significant role for civil society, for the third sector, non-governmental organizations, social business, to fill some of the gaps or to correct some of the crises left by capitalism. So I hope that that's an understandable answer, that there isn't a yes or no, because capitalism comes in many flavors. And capitalism, in the sense of private market system and private ownership, is part of the solution, but not if it's allowed to run amok. Not if markets are left out of control or lobbying groups for business are given the dominance that they currently enjoy in Washington. Then we have a system that does not produce sustainable development. Here's another very good question coming up from Sid Radhakrishna. Corporations are starting to take sustainable development seriously and have realigned long-term strategies, and Unilever is indeed a famous example that Sid is citing. What will it take for the mainstream corporates to fully integrate sustainable development into their bottom lines? Oh, again, another very big question. First, there are several different theories of corporate behavior. One theory says corporations should do whatever it takes to maximize their shareholder value as long as it isn't against the law. Even cheating, even tax avoidance, even pollution, if it's not prohibited, go for it to maximize shareholder value. Of course, the enlightened view is if companies cheat, maybe that won't be good for them in the long term, but one basic view says corporates should just do whatever it takes because their business is business. And a late American economist who was very influential, Milton Friedman, a Nobel laureate, used to take that view. Said just let business be business, but put on the rules of the game so that business behaves better. There's another view of business which says no. Businesses need to respect multiple stakeholders, not only their shareholders, but their workers, that they need to treat with dignity and with labor rights, their customers, their supply chain, to ensure that when they buy supplies, say agricultural products, that those are produced sustainably. That's a kind of multi-stakeholder approach. There's another view related to that which I espouse, which is that companies do not have the right, even if it's legal, to make their incomes on the basis of hurting parts of society. So even if a company can get away with polluting, it should not take that option, because it should have a principle like doctors have: first, do no harm. And that's the kind of standard that I'm also trying to emphasize at the United Nations. Now, how do we make companies in any event behave better, more pro-socially? There are a lot of aspects to that. One is we should regulate them so that they're not allowed rampant pollution and abusive impunity and financial fraud. Second, we should correct market signals, for example, by putting a carbon tax in place so that companies know that if they pollute, they're imposing a cost and they face a financial incentive not to do so. Third, we should have transparency and disclosure and reporting that says, here's what this company is doing. It's creating a mess. It is causing harm to local communities. Fourth, that we should have a legal system which holds companies legally accountable for criminal or civil wrongs that they commit, such as oil spills. They have to clean up. they penalties for negligent behavior, and so on. Fifth, companies should be called upon to honor global goals the same way that governments are called upon. When we have sustainable development goals, I hope that one of the key principles of those sustainable development goals will be that companies are honoring those sustainable development goals, that they're taking them on in their own business practices. And we're certainly urging that there should be a reporting requirement for big companies. What are you doing to promote the sustainable development goals? And then finally, I would mention the idea of changing the corporate charter so that companies are held to a standard to do no harm, not to make their money by creating spillover or negative externality effects on others in the society. And I believe that it could be very important to clarify that kind of principle. So these are all ways that we can reorient our current economy and the current behavior of politicians and businesses. We live right now with very short-term perspectives, with companies that do not honor environmental realities, with market signals that do not shift us towards green growth, with politicians that are very, very short-sighted, maybe at best looking to the next election, maybe not even that far. And we need a change of direction globally to take into account the longer term, to ensure that technologies that are adopted are green in the sense we talked about, decoupling growth from primary resource use, and to hold companies accountable for their behavior, especially when they're causing great harm or damage to communities where they work, to the environment in which they're operating. Not only are the topics of sustainable development hugely complicated, interconnecting economics, sociology, social dynamics, culture, environment, politics, in interconnected systems, but also forcing us to do things in a very, very different manner from the way that we've been operating. On one level, the course, The Age of Sustainable Development, and the book really are about that. How do we reorient? How could we make these complicated interconnected systems work for us for inclusive and sustainable growth rather than exclusive and non-sustainable development? Second, I would say that this year of negotiations gives us a unique opportunity to put these issues squarely in front of the world, to get our politicians, yes, to adopt long-term goals, to put their signatures to them, in effect, so that the whole world is focusing on these great challenges. Well, I haven't answered a long, long list of questions, and the list keeps growing. That's good. We're going to do more Google Hangouts. Tweet. Please follow me at Jeff D. Sachs on Twitter and use hashtag SUSDev. I would like to use Twitter for your feedback and for my hour-to-hour and day-by-day communication with you in an easy way. And we'll use a number of Google Hangouts along the way. I'm going to be looking forward to hearing your thoughts, of course, and your comments. I want to thank those of you who have joined the course, Age of Sustainable Development, through the Global Poverty Project and the 2014 Global Citizen Festival. That's going to be on September 27, excuse me, September 27, Saturday, September 27. Tell your friends that if they would like to go to this wonderful concert on the great lawn of Central Park, New York City. It's a lot of fun. About 70,000 people show up. You have to be a good global citizen, and one of the ways to do that is to join the course Age of Sustainable Development. So you can go to the Global Poverty Project and sign on to the course, get points so that you can get tickets for this great concert on sustainable development on September 27th. I also want to encourage people to go to the Avaaz website, avaaz.org, avaaz.org. I'll tweet out the URL for that shortly. There's a petition on it calling on world leaders to honor the 2 degrees Celsius limit on global warming that they agreed to in Cancun in 2010, and that needs to be the basis for the COP21 agreement in Paris in 2015. And we've collected about 1 million signatures by now of people who are saying to world leaders, honor the 2 degrees C. I'm going to deliver that petition together with Avaaz great leaders. They do such an amazing job worldwide. We're going to go and deliver this petition with its 1 million+ names, and we want your names on it, to Secretary General Ban Ki-moon on September 23rd at the UN Global Summit on Climate Change. We want the voices of students, your participation in this call to world leaders, protect the planet, is very, very important. So the Global Citizens Festival, Global Poverty Project, and Avaaz.org, I'll be tweeting out all of that information. Hashtag SUSDEV. We'll be together again soon. Let's do another Google Hangout very soon. We'll be sending out the dates shortly. Thanks for the great questions, and thanks for the participation today. It's always fun for me to see this great thinking, great questions, great feedback, and I really appreciate it, and hope you've enjoyed the Hangout. Be together with you soon.